In a world where space and time are intertwined, one man dared to challenge the status quo. His name? Dayton Miller. His weapon of choice? A flute. But not just any flute. This instrument held the power to unleash the ether, a pervasive medium once thought to fill the universe. Miller, a physicist by trade, a musician at heart, discovered a harmonic resonance within the ether. He found that his flute, when played with precision, could manipulate this elusive medium. His melodies, a symphony of science, had the potential to shift the very fabric of reality. However, a sinister force lurked in the shadows. The Einsteinian demons. These creatures thrived in the distortion of space-time, causing chaos and disruption. The world needed a hero, and Miller was ready to answer the call. With his flute in hand, Miller played a tune that echoed through the cosmos.
All right, lads and ladettes, hello and welcome. We're doing an ether cosmology research and reading night tonight. And in the chat, there is a link that's pinned for the Ether Cosmology merch shop, which was recently launched. We're doing a limited run on special edition, limited, once in a lifetime only print tees. Hoodies. If you want to get one of the Ether Cosmology lifetime member hoodies, you need to order them between now and the 13th. It'll be the last time that they're ever available. And then, of course, we'll be running the shop with shirts and hats after that. But the limited edition hoodie, if you want to be a lifetime member and supporter with the hoodie, you need to order it now. All right, we'll get into research and reading night. And shout out to Taylor, who socially shamed me into bringing back research and reading night. So here we go, lads. We'll join the boys and get into it. Hola, amigos. We ready to begin some reading? Waits for
Sounds
exciting. Yeah, nice. Stone's always ready. All right. Significance. This is The Significance of Maxwell's Equations by Frederick Tombe. So James Clerk Maxwell is credited with having brought electricity, magnetism, and optical phenomenon together into one unified theory. The details of what exactly he did, however, are seriously distorted in 20th century physics books. Maxwell is most famous in the connection with a set of equations which bear his name, but these equations have been totally removed from the physical context within which Maxwell was working. And outside of that physical context, the full meaning of these equations is lost. Maxwell was working within the context of a sea of tiny ethereal vortices pressing against each other with centrifugal force. The centrifugal force bit was crucial for explaining magnetic repulsion, yet both centrifugal force and ether are strictly denied by modern physicists who nevertheless continue to hail Maxwell for the equations that he derived using these very concepts which are denied by them. This irony seems to be explained, at least in part, because they think that these equations can be re-derived using Einstein's special theory of relativity. Such an erroneous belief stems from the fact that most of the important of Maxwell's equations has wrongly been accredited to Lorentz and is referred to as the Lorentz law or the Lorentz force law, and it is treated as supplementary to Maxwell's equations. Einstein, being most ignorant of Maxwell's original equations and the fact that they contained a Lorentz law, hence wrongly believed that the equations contained no convective term, and so he made the erroneous conclusion that Maxwell's equations mean that the speed of light must be frame independent and contraction of classical principles of vector addition and velocities. Oh, and in contradiction of classical principles of vector addition and velocities. This erroneous conclusion led Einstein to his special theory of relativity in 1905, and it subsequently led the erroneous belief amongst both relativists and many anti-relativists that Einstein's special theory of relativity follows naturally from Maxwell's theory, and when in fact Maxwell and Einstein were not even remotely working along the same lines. A background sea of tiny ethereal whirlpools. In an article written by Nikola Tesla in 1907 entitled Man's Greatest Achievement, Tesla writes, quote, Long ago, he recognized the all perceptible matter comes from a all primary substance of tenuity beyond conception and filling all space. The akasha or luminiferous ether, which is acted upon by the life giving prana or creative force, calling into existence in never ending cycles all things and phenomenon. The primary substance is thrown into infinitesimal whirls of prodigies, prodigy velocities, prodigious velocities, becomes gross matter, and then force subsiding, the motion ceases, the matter disappears, reverting into the primary substance. Tesla, 1930. John Bernoulli the Younger. In the 18th century, the younger John Bernoulli worked on a premise that space is densely packed with tiny ethereal whirlpools that are pressing against each other with centrifugal force while striving to dilate. The merits of each vision lie in the fact that centrifugal force can be used to explain so many of the basic principles behind both inertia and electromagnetism, and indeed would appear that such an idea still prevailed when Sir Oliver Lodge wrote the article on ether in physics in 1937 for the Encyclopedia Britannica, the 14th edition. Oh, no way. That's awesome. This is great. Well, we might read this later at the end. I've used this in a Prezi. I didn't know he was the one that wrote that. That's awesome. All right. In connection with the speed of light, the article states the most probable surmise or guess at present is that the ether is a perfectly incompressible continuous fluid in a state of fine-grained vortex motion circulating with the same enormous speed, for it has been partly, though as yet incompletely shown that such a vortex fluid would translate waves of the same general nature as light, i.e., periodic disturbances across a line of propagation, and would transmit them at the rate of the same order of magnitude as the vortex or circulation speed. And the article goes on to cite from Lord Kelvin the vortex theory of ether. This is a really interesting theory he had. So Lord Kelvin was working on deriving an ether vortex theory using hydrodynamic principles, but the mathematics at the time hadn't been sufficiently advanced enough to fully describe what they were trying to put forward. And then J.J. Thomson picked it up a little bit after. But yeah, there's an entire history to this. It's really interesting where they were working on a hydrodynamic ether vortice theory, but then the electron theory kind of bolstered the ballistic atomic particle model. And they just went with that because the math was a lot easier. All right, James Clerk Maxwell, Section 3. Maxwell is most famous for having derived a set of electromagnetic equations and also for showing that light is an electromagnetic wave. He is accepted by modern physicists or by the modern physics establishment as one of the all-time greatest physicists. And he is even credited with having paved the way for Einstein's theory of relativity. This, however, is a totally distorted view of the actual situation. The fact is that Maxwell's core ideas in electromagnetism had their origins in a sea of a molecular vortice exactly along the lines of what Tesla and Sir Oliver Lodge were referring to above, and which John Bernoulli, more than 2 centuries ago, had considered to exist as a medium for propagation of light. Or physics denies the existence, or modern physics denies the existence of such a medium, just as it denies the existence of centrifugal force as a physical reality, even though centrifugal force is the most significant factor behind the electromagnetic wave propagation mechanism within this medium. Maxwell's real achievements are in fact totally alien to modern physics, and indeed he was not remotely working along the same lines as Einstein. In a preamble to part 1 of his 1861 paper on physical lines of force, Maxwell gives details about who had influenced him amongst others. He mentions Lord Kelvin in relation to identifying the rotary nature of magnetism. John Bernoulli, however, is not mentioned in his preamble, and it is interesting that Maxwell ended up coming up with a similar conclusion as Bernoulli. Maxwell identified that the cause of magnetic repulsion in terms of centrifugal pressure arising in a sea of molecular vortices. He identified the mechanism for the force on a current carrying a wire and also for motionally induced EMF, and in terms of a differential centrifugal pressure in the sea of molecular vortices. He explained he explained time varying electromagnetic induction on the basis of tiny vortices in space acting like flywheels. Maxwell's explanation for time varying electromagnetic induction was essentially the same as John Bernoulli's explanation for electromagnetic wave propagation's mechanism between two ether whirlpools. According to Whittaker, Bernoulli's view was that, quote, a source of light communicates to its surrounding a disturbance which condenses the nearest whirlpools. These, by their condensed, these by their condensation, displace the uh, contiguous corpuscles from their equilibrium position, and in turn produce condensation in the whirlpools next beyond them. John Bernoulli, 18th century. This is essentially electromagnetic induction acting between electric circuits where the whirlpools are miniature electric circuits. Maxwell first dealt with the electromagnetic wave propagation mechanism in part 3 of his 1861 paper, where in the preamble he states, quote, I conceived of rotating matter to be the substance of certain cells divided from each by other cell walls comprised of particles which are very small compared with the cell, and that it is by the motions of these particles that their tangential action on the substance in the cells that the rotation is communicated from one cell to another. Maxwell, 1861. So it would seem that Maxwell and Bernoulli's ideas were totally compatible. It would further seem that Maxwell took the matter even further than John Bernoulli by numerically linking the speed of light to the electrostatic and electromagnetic constants. So, he's famous for showing that the reciprocal of the electric permittivity and magnetic permeability values give the speed of light. In the year 1855, Weber and Kohlrausch performed an experiment with a Leyden jar and established the ratio between the quantity of electricity measured statically to the same quantity of electricity measured electrodynamically. This ratio turned out to be numerically related to the speed of light. The literature is unclear as to when exactly Weber and Kohlrausch or Maxwell became explicitly aware of this apparent numerical coincidence, but the evidence does seem to indicate that it strongly influenced Part 3 of Maxwell's 1861 paper, where Maxwell demonstrated that it's of its full physical significance. Maxwell showed that the ratio in question could be used in Newton's equations for the speed of a wave in a elastic solid, hence confirming that that light is an elastic wave in a particulate solid. Maxwell essentially demonstrated that Weber and Kohlrausch had in fact unwittingly measured the speed of light using an indirect method. Maxwell's last word on the luminiferous ether can be read in the article on, quote, ether, which he wrote in 1878 in the Encyclopedia Britannica 9th edition. He states towards the end of the article, Sir W. Thomson has shown that the magnetic influence on light discovered by Faraday depends on the direction of motion of moving particles, and that indicates a rotational motion in the medium when magnetized. Now, it is manifest that this rotation cannot be of the medium as a whole about an axis, for the magnetic field may be of any breadth, and there is no evidence of any motion. There is no evidence of any motion, the velocity of which increases with the distance from a single fixed line in the field. If there is any motion of rotation, it must be a rotation of a very small portion of the medium, each about its own axis, so that the medium must be broken up into a number of molecular vortices. We have as yet no data to which determine the number of size of these molecular vortices. Maxwell's equations. As regard to the equations of Maxwell and his famous, as regards to the equations of Maxwell, that Maxwell is famous for, his development in these equations requires some elaboration. In 1861, he derived the equations hydrodynamically within the context of a sea of molecular vortices, and of these equations were already in existence. And some of these equations were already in existence. One of the equations, which was unequivocally his own in the way of his equations of electromotive force. This equation takes the form of E equals mu v times the cross product of H minus the partial derivative of A over the partial derivative of E minus grad psi. What is, you know what grad psi means, anyone? Any grad psiers in the chat?
Probably a gradient value.
Oh, okay. Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Okay. And then
Degrees,
here, so
radians, gradients.
that makes sense. And then here we see Maxwell using the ether vector potential, right? Which Bennett has talked about. And who was that gentleman? Thomas Phipps, who was analyzing the Maxwellian Hertz equations that show that you can derive all of Maxwell's equations from the ether vector potential in a partial derivative of time. All right. And it is clear in this equation that in the same essence as the equation which is nowadays known as the Lorentz force law. Ironically, it is nowadays considered a necessary supplement to Maxwell's equations, even though it is actually one of Maxwell's original equations. To make that's insane. To make matters worse, modern physics links Maxwell's equations to Einstein's theory of relativity on the very basis of not realizing that equation 1 is one of Maxwell's equations. Einstein's entire basis for postulating the constancy of the speed of light lay in the misinformed view that Maxwell's equations do not contain a convective term. That's true. We've read it many times here in the first paragraph of his 1905 paper, when he's talking about the conductor and the magnet and the relative motion of them. It is in this respect, in particular, that Maxwell's contribution to electromagnetism has been totally distorted. Maxwell and Einstein were not remotely working along the same lines, while Maxwell was quite clear about the fact that the speed of light is a measured value relative to an elastic solid comprised of fluid vortices, and most certainly not a frame independent as believed by the relativist. As regards of a set of equations that modern textbooks list under the title of Maxwell's equations, these lists contain two curl equations. One of these curl equations is referred to as Faraday's law, although it only deals with a time-varying electromagnetic induction, whereas Faraday's original law had a wider application to the conductive kind, as well. There was another curl in Maxwell's equations original list of 1864, but this does not appear in the modern set of Maxwell's equations. This is a very important equation. Curl of the A vector potential is equal to mu times H, which relates the flywheel nature of the magnetic field, is played down nowadays in favor of the much less informative equation, the div of B is equal to 0, which is obtained by taking the divergence of equation 2. The third curl equation, which appeared in both Maxwell's original listing and in modern listings, is Ampere's circuital law, and Maxwell is most famous for having extended it to include the conception of the displacement current. The displacement current concept was purely Maxwell's own idea, although Maxwell's concept of it bears no relation to the term which bears the same name in modern textbooks. The displacement current, which we've read about in the reading night where we featured Anel Deneu's work in History of Maxwell's Equation. That was an awesome reading night. So the displacement current, number 5. Displacement current was conceived by Maxwell in 1861 and is often seen as being the crowning achievement because it enabled Maxwell to derive the electromagnetic wave equation. It is often wrongly believed that Maxwell's derivation of the electromagnetic wave equation was on the basis of unity between electromagnetic wave phenomenon and optical phenomenon. However, as stated in section 3 above, the unity had already been established in 1855 by Weber or Kohlrausch without involving the concept of a displacement current. It was in 1862 when Maxwell established the full physical significance of the Weber-Kohlrausch ratio by linking the ratio of elasticity of a hypothetical perfect solid with that and perfect solid, and then it was that with man. Start over there. It was in 1862 when Maxwell established the full physical significance of the Weber-Kohlrausch ratio by linking this ratio with the elasticity of a hypothetically perfect solid, and it was then he first stated his conclusion that light was a wave in the same medium and that that is the cause of electromagnetic phenomenon. But it wasn't until 1864 when Maxwell derived the electromagnetic wave equation by invoking the displacement current. That's crazy. We must therefore remember that this is not a displacement current itself that is important, but rather the physical nature of the displacement mechanism and the fact that the elasticity can be linked to the speed of light. Displacement current is simply a vehicle for introducing the luminiferous elasticity. At the beginning of part 3 in his 1861 paper, it would seem that Maxwell had in fact grasped the rotary nature of the displacement mechanism as John Bernoulli a century earlier, but as we had read on, Maxwell's vortices, which had been planar up until then, and which need to be planar in order to explain magnetic lines of force, are suddenly replaced by elastic spheres, and the elastic displacement becomes tangentially stretched instead of the equivocal angular acceleration. By 1864, Maxwell was already likening displacement current to linear polarization in a dielectric, and in this respect, he had gone wrong. He had inadvertently crossed the floor from the magnetization into the realms of the capacitors, and hence confused the issue. Ironically, this did lead Maxwell to realize that there is a dielectric nature to the luminiferous ether, and that was a good thing, but he never seemed to have thought to combine the dielectric vision with the molecular vortex vision. This would have directed him to the realization of a double helix structure, and hence to an explanation behind the electrostatic tension in the magnetic lines of force, which have been identified, which he had identified but hadn't explained. Maxwell's equations can certainly apply on the large, but we must remember that the displacement current is something which only has meaning on the picoscopic scale. The displacement current only has meaning in relation to electromagnetic wave propagation mechanism, and it arises in the connection with the angular acceleration of electrical circulations within a tiny molecular vortice which fill all of space. These tiny vortices are in fact quite simply a miniature electrical circuit, and the angular acceleration of these vortices, which are often harmonic, have no relevance when it comes to large-scale application in electronics. As such, in capacitors or transmission lines, in the modern post-ether era, the situation has become even worse because the displacement current is now derived by sleight of hand through the context of conservation of charge in a complete vacuum. It is justified as a mathematical necessity in electromagnetic radiation without remotely considering how it links to the physical propagation mechanism. This is the kind of doublethink, along with the wrong association of the displacement current with capacitors, that has caused the modern physics to lose all of the richness of Maxwell's equations. Compound centrifugal force. A sea of molecular vortices enables action of compound centrifugal force. This is what occurs when the vortices press harder on one side of an object than on the other. Mathematically compound centrifugal force falls straight out of hydrodynamics as being the inevitable consequence of linear motion occurring in conjunction with rotary motion, but the mathematics alone cannot tell us the physical conditions which will lead to the existence of such a force. Hence, many believers in ether miss the crucial point that this is not a question of establishing what the ether is made of so much as it is a question of realizing that everything is made of ether, and whatever that might be, it causes inertial and electromagnetic effects by virtue that the fact that it is rendered into a state of tiny whirlpools. Without the tiny whirlpools, all ether theories fail because they would be unable to account for inertial forces and and magnetic repulsion. Each whirlpool is in fact a tiny electric circuit, and what Maxwell failed to realize was in fact that the electric particles that surround these whirlpools number only two. There is a positron acting as an ether source and an electron acting as an ether sink. They both circulate around the edge of a whirlpool, and when the angular acceleration occurs, it is combined with the excessive outflow from the positron source. The excess outflow, which is directed, spills over into the neighboring whirlpool, and this mechanism is the basis of both time-varying electromagnetic induction and electromagnetic radiation. In 1835, the French physicist Gaspard Gustave Coriolis, shout out to Coriolis, no relation to Tony Coriolis, identified the compounding centrifugal force mathematically in connection with water wheels, but he failed to identify the physical cause of this force or realize that in the context it must necessarily be restricted to the transverse direction. As a consequence of Coriolis's association with the compound centrifugal force, such a force nowadays is referred to as the Coriolis force. Conclusion. The denial of both ether and centrifugal force in modern physics leaves many phenomenon totally unexplainable. A classical example is the rattleback and sometimes the Celtic stone. A rotating rattleback spontaneously reverses its axis of rotation in absence of any known external forces apart from the inertial forces. But the latter are not officially recognized to be real forces, and here's where the error begins. The reason for the reversal is in fact because of differential pressure coming from tiny vortices in the background luminiferous ether, which Maxwell used to derive his famous equations. Because the rattleback is asymmetrically shaped, the induced compounding centrifugal force, or Coriolis force here, coming from the tiny vortices as they strive to dilate, leads to a radial centrifugal force on the large scale. During the rattleback's rocking stage, the asymmetry means that the centrifugal force will not be aligned with the inward centripetal force, which bonds the rattleback's constituent molecules together, hence leading to the resultant torque. This will cause the rattleback to precess, and the rocking motion will be converted to a preferred horizontal rotation according to the celerity of the asymmetry. If the rattleback was rotated against
that would be chirality.
Chirality, thank you, sir.
Yeah, go.
If the rattleback is rotated against the preferred direction, any incidental accompanying rocking motion, which will be largely unavoidable, will cause the total reversal of the original motion. But neither ether nor centrifugal force being recognized in the textbooks as a physical reality, modern physics doesn't know where to start when attempting to explain the mysterious rattleback phenomenon. Mathematically, it's obvious that the forces take the form of a compound centrifugal force, or Coriolis force, because it is the force which acts at right angles to the direction of motion. But no amount of mathematics in isolation can explain where this force is coming from. Nevertheless, we see in literature the occasional utter hopelessness attempt to physically explain the rattleback, based on the pages of complicated mathematics, as if the mathematics itself could unearth the real physical force. That's hilarious. Maxwell was most certainly not a stepping stone for Einstein, as it is suggested even by some anti-relativists. Maxwell's most important work has been swept under the carpet and the set of equations with partial connections to Maxwell have been promoted with his name and used in a manner which is far removed from the original theory of electromagnetism by Maxwell. All right, lads, any thoughts on that? I know Stone, you read this paper earlier. Did you have any thoughts on that? I wanted to show people the rattleback.
Yeah,
I thought that was really cool.
That was quite the jaunt, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Through the land of spurious assertions with no fact to back it up, no explanation, no supplementary arithmetics. I mean, when we take a look at this reference list down below, it's actually one that I meant to interrupt you, but I wasn't. I was busy finishing up another post just at the top when you started reading. That footnote 2 was actually something worthy of reading during what we were doing. But you'll notice in the sum of his footnotes, only numbering 8, the last 4, as in 5, 6, 7, and 8, are his own papers that he's quoting.
Yes.
And I also noticed liberal use of the word fact in this 8-page paper, that he says, because of the fact this, because of the well-known fact that, and taken in fact this is also true, when he offers little more than these 8 footnotes references at the bottom to back up anything that he's saying is fact. And I don't know, personally, I find this to be another paper where they're talking about it, but they're just not using the term. You know, this takes me back to Eric Dollard again, and the rants, the lectures that I've given, even here in this arena, in the recent past, about what Eric Dollard and others have said about counter space, about the electromagnetic interplay to do specifically with induction and capacitance, etc. Exactly like this guy is analyzing here. But they're just not actually saying it. They keep talking about this elasticity when I see that relating in real performance, you know, in terms of a circuit, exactly what's going on inside the coil, exactly when you turn the power to the coil off, exactly like I've been speaking about the off phase, the beginning of the off phase of pulse DC going through a coil, and what happens in terms of polarity within the coil at that moment, and how it snaps back the other way with almost infinite voltage for an almost infinitely short period of time. That is the elasticity that he's talking about here with electromagnetic propagation. They're just not mentioning any physical, real examples of it. They are only citing the process. And it's really hard to address the reader and get them mentally engaged in any tangible, you know, less than abstract physical understanding of the mechanism itself in terms of cause. That these all words are fine and dandy, and it's all great that he got these feelings down on paper, and how many times Einstein got it wrong, and that's all great, but I don't know. I don't see anything in here that suggests the reality of whirlpools. He rather adheres a lot to the molecular model. There's a great deal of physics not covered here. I think that's the greater point that I'm trying to make. But yeah, I would say again, quite the jaunt down assertion avenue here. Very interesting paper. And he put everybody to sleep. All right.
No, I was considering your position on...
referring to the other 8 people and 10 people in this room here.
No, so I was thinking about what you said about like practical use examples and stuff. That is really important. And the snapback of what you measure in the circuit, it's a really good example of that. But what I particularly liked about this is not necessarily explanation of the physical mechanism, like that could be neither here nor there, right? But the big like the more important thing that I liked from it was that the mainstream interpretation of, you know, how important it is that relativity is linked to these theories and to Maxwell's equations to be like he's saying, like a supplement, like, we've seen it time and time again. Like they need the backbone of this theory that's fundamentally derived under completely different principles, right? Where they've had to obfuscate basically the Lorentz force term, right? So that they could be solely attributed to the miracles of Saint Einstein. Right?
It's a
like
coattail ride, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a nice little history on the backbone of that. And then when they get into how mainstream can't explain inertial forces, properly, right? They're like, it's a pseudo force, it's not real, it's a result of a coordinate system transformation. Like that's insane, right? Like it obviously comes from resistance to something, right? In the same respect, if you were like in a pool, you would have resistance to the medium. Like it's the same kind of concept, but
Totally.
they're like,
I think it happened more than a couple of times in this paper. Sorry,
Yeah.
man. I'm agreeing with you wholeheartedly that more than a couple of times in this paper, he said, look, we're describing something here, but we're not explaining it. Absolutely.
Yeah. But yeah, it was a nice little history rundown. And then he has another paper on where he further breaks down these equations from Maxwell that he's referencing here. So we'll probably read that in the future. I'll send that over to you. But yeah, this is the backbone of what technology and whatnot runs on, and how everything is explained and taught to everyone. And it's obfuscated, twisted, terms are dropped out, and the physical meaning and interpretation is lost and misconstrued, so that a certain cosmological worldview that was mixed with physics can be put forward. But yeah, it was a good read.
To wit, a repackaging of it, even. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Anyone else have any thoughts?
Yeah, Eric just showed up.
Oh, hello.
Oh, hold on one second. Shalom.
Hey, how we doing, man?
Oh, I'm fine, thank you. I hope you are well and everyone else. I posted. There's another paper that he wrote. Did you see that, Alan?
Oh, I got all his papers. Which ones did you post?
Oh, it was in the main chat.
I got the whole collection, dude.
It was it was
The other Tombe paper was Tesla on the ether and the implications.
right, that's one. And but it's what index with 135R. So that was Tesla and the ether.
Yep, I got that one. Yeah, here's a little diagram of what he was talking about earlier, saying that electron and positron, the source and sink was creating a line of force between them or whatever. This is what he was talking about.
Yeah, it was like a gimme. There was no debate on whether positrons exist. He just moved right into it. Yeah, it was very interesting.
Well, I mean, like in all fairness, it's like there's something that's measured there, like whatever you want to call it. Like he's just trying to conceptualize like the mechanism in terms of like something more physical than abstract, But yeah, I get what you're saying though. It's like, show me your little positron pair, dude. Intermittent hot mic from Ken. Very nice. All right, lads.
Blame it on the lighter.
I was going to ask. We didn't check. So
I think we're gonna wrap up. All right. Well, thank you guys for tuning in to
coffee ad.
Oh, a little coffee ad from
Our
Lily.
ambassadress is here.
Oh, hello. Hi. How are you
how
guys
about a
doing?
sweatshirt ad?
Well, we're
yeah.
forthcoming. Hold on. Lily has two jobs now, guys.
Sweatshirts, folks.
I was going to say we should switch her over.
The merch store is very exciting. Yeah. Oh, I just ordered some of the Mexican coffee from Mexico. I reordered it because it was so good. Yeah, and that's the only drawback is that every time I drink that brushtail coffee and I go out, I keep getting marriage proposals. So it's kind of annoying, but if you don't mind that, brushtail coffee is so good. Yeah. So I just ordered a new bag for myself. Woo! Yummy.
Nice, Lily. Very nice. But yeah, we have the Ether Cosmology shop that's running for a limited time. So if you haven't bought a hoodie yet, your chance to get them is slowly dwindling away. By the 13th, there will be no hoodies ever again, ever created. You'll have to make a counterfeit hoodie. You don't want to be one of these people with a Chinese counterfeit knockoff Ether Cosmology hoodie. Get your authentic Chinese knockoff authentic hoodie or whatever. Anyway, just kidding. They're made right here locally in America land. All right. So the hoodies are available. They're a limited time print. All of the Ether Cosmology merch that's available is also on sale throughout the week. So get everything while you can. And we'll see you guys tomorrow for a debate. Shane and I are debating on modern day debates. We're going against McToon and some unknown globularist hero. Inshallah, it's Mordwand.
My condolences.
Yeah, I was super excited, but we'll try to make the best of it. You know, like when you're in a car accident and you're like, well, there's nothing I can do now, but
Like, at least I didn't break both my legs and die, right? It could have been worse or whatever.
Right. So we're going to do that. And then on Saturday, there's going to be a special show over at Earth Awakenings. We're going to be discussing the GPS system. Can you use timing intervals to measure Earth curvature? It was recently asserted, well, it's been long asserted, that you can use GPS to measure reciprocal zennies and such. So we're going to get into some of that on Geos on Saturday. So there'll be a thumbnail and stream for that coming up soon. And we'll do something Sunday. And then, of course, Monday will be the Sell Theo update number 5. And then we'll close out the sale for the week on Tuesday with a presentation by Shane. I think, right, Shane?
Right. Yep. Yep.
All right, you heard it here. He's contractually obligated now. He's committed.
All right.
All right.